technically, entering the flow state is impossible. And today, we're going to teach you how to do it. There are a lot of productivity chads out there talking about the flow state. And if you look at stuff like Harvard Business Review and like Huffington Post, everyone's like, oh my God, like the flow state, the flow state. Everyone should enter the flow state. Once you get into a flow state, you can do this. If you want to be more productive and have a side hustle, learn how to enter the flow state. And yet there are very few resources that actually tell you how to consistently enter the flow state. And the reason for that is because technically entering the flow state is impossible. And today we're going to teach you how to do it. So let's take a step back and understand exactly what the flow state is, because that'll tell us why it's impossible to enter one and also how to enter one. The first thing to understand is that the flow state is a state. It is not an action. It's not a verb. So as human beings, we can do things that are verbs. I can, for example, read a book. I can hold up a pen. I can smile and wink. These are things that I can do. But the flow state is a state of mind. You cannot do a state of mind. A state of mind is something that happens to you. So this is a really critical discovery that yogis in ancient India made a couple thousand years ago, is they sort of discovered that you can't actually go to sleep. It is technically impossible to go to sleep. What you can do is go to bed, you can lay down, and then hopefully, if you're lucky, the state of mind that is sleep will happen to you. And this is something that you may actually be very, very familiar with, because if you're like me, there have been times in your life where you try to go to sleep and you try really, really hard to go to sleep. You get into bed and you're like, oh my God, I need to go to sleep. I need to go to sleep. Oh my God, it's so late. I'm going to be so tired tomorrow. Oh my God, sleep now, dumbass, sleep. And then the harder you try, the harder it is to actually attain sleep. And the flow state is exactly the same way, where it's not something that you can do. The good news is that much like actually falling asleep, there are many things that you can do that will facilitate the state of flow. And yogis are able to consistently enter a state of flow or stay in a state of flow for hours, if not decades at a time. So let's understand what's involved. The first thing that you need to enter a flow state is a state of eustress. So by eustress, I mean EU, the prefix that means good, stress. So we're all familiar with distress, which is what we sort of call stress nowadays. We refer to it as distress, which is stress that is bad, causes me problems. And in order to attain a flow state, we need a healthy amount of stress. So if we're trying to do a task and the task is too easy, what that does is induce boredom. On the other hand, if the task that we're trying to do is too hard, that will induce distress and will feel overwhelming. In both of these situations, it leads to a wandering mind. So if I'm bored by a particular task at hand, what's going to happen with my mind? I'm going to start thinking about other things. But what about the case of being overwhelmed? So if I'm overwhelmed about writing this paper that needs to be written by Monday at 8 a.m., then what's going to happen is, in addition to focusing on the paper, my mind is going to be thinking all kinds of other things. Like, what if I don't write the paper fast enough? What if it's bad? I should have started earlier. Should I ask for help? Should I email an extension? What will the professor think if I email them for an extension? Will they give it? Will they not give it? Will they think I'm pathetic? So if you think about the state of mind when you're overwhelmed, you're not just thinking about the task at hand. You're actually thinking a lot of other thoughts. So instead, what we want is a state of something called eustress, where our attention is going to be engaged and focused. So if we look at the part of our brain that governs eustress, it's this part of our brain called the reticular activating formation. So the RAF is actually a primitive circuit kind of in the back of our brain that sort of governs our ability to be awake and alert and focused on a particular thing. And it turns out that the RAF is uniquely sensitive to cortisol, which is a stress hormone. And by uniquely sensitive, what I mean is that you require some of it to actually activate the RAF, but if it's too much, it sort of causes problems in the RAF. And if it's too little, the RAF is kind of like half-assing it. So we literally need a decent amount of stress chemical. And so if you're struggling to activate the RAF, if you're struggling to get engaged with a task, there are two things that you can do to put yourself in the eustress state. The first is that if you're bored, what you can do is change the frame of the task to make it more challenging. So this is something that I used to do. So I used to be pretty good at RTS games. And then eventually, like when I played with my friends, like I'd always dumpster them, right? Because I'm fucking Dr. K right here, son. And so what I would start to do to like make things interesting for myself, and you know this if you're a pro gamer, is you'll like start to restrict internally the limits that the units you can use, right? So I was playing StarCraft and I would go like all fire bat. So I'd like pick some lame, stupid unit that like isn't that good, but I'm going to see if I can challenge myself, and lol, if I can crush them with only fire bats, it will make me an even more epic gamer. And this is also something that I use for people who are bored by school, which is that I'll tell them, okay, instead of like trying to learn the material, pretend that you are going to teach the material a week from now, or pretend that you are going to tutor in the material a year from now. And so by sort of increasing the difficulty of the task internally, it'll activate more cortisol, recruit your RAF, and keep you engaged. On the flip side, if the task is overwhelming, there are a couple of things you can do to bring that stress level down. So generally speaking, when we feel overwhelmed, we don't feel overwhelmed because of the actual tasks at hand. The reason we technically feel overwhelmed is because of an emotion. So if we look at sort of the sensation of being overwhelmed in the psychology, like the cognition of being overwhelmed, it's actually driven by emotions. Because even if you have a paper due in 48 hours, if you can sort of ground yourself, emotionally sort of calm down and sort of develop a plan of attack, you can sit down and actually pound that work out. So if you're feeling overwhelmed, the primary thing you need to do is actually metabolize the emotion. And there are a couple of simple ways to do that. One really good way to metabolize emotion or calm down emotion is through breath. So we know, for example, that breath has a reciprocal relationship with emotion. So when I start breathing a particular way, when I start feeling a particular way, I will start breathing a particular way. So if I like start breathing like this, what do y'all think I'm feeling right now, right? And on the flip side, I can start breathing like this. And if you start hyperventilate with me for a second. You start to feel like really uncomfortable, right? You can induce that discomfort with your breath. And the flip side of it is also true, that if you take a long, deep breath, and what we really want to do is focus on long exhalations. Just stop breathing, close your eyes for a second. If you change your breath, the emotions will change with it. So if you're feeling overwhelmed, you can even see, pay attention to my voice, right? I can feel myself calming down with a single breath. My voice is changing, my tone is changing, and it's literally that simple. The more you practice it, the better you'll be. There are other kinds of emotional metabolism techniques you can use. You can journal, you can write things out, you can talk to a friend, but literally breath is the most powerful and sudden thing that you can use to lower your stress levels and feel less overwhelmed. So now we have the first of 3 things that we need to enter a flow state, which is a level of eustress. And so our brain needs a couple of other things to enter a flow state. What we know about flow states is that they involve a synchronicity of activity across the brain. So it's not that one part of your brain is active and another is inactive. It's actually that all parts of your brain are kind of uniformly active. So what are the other things that we need to capitalize on? The second thing that we need to enter a flow state is a lack of ego. So when yogis were sort of studying the flow state, they discovered a couple of things. Step number 1 is when I meditate on an object. Let's say I'm meditating on a candle or something like that. There's me in here and there's the candle out there. So what I'm going to do is I am going to look at the candle and I'm going to focus the attention of my mind on the candle. And then if I focus the attention of my mind on the candle long enough, what will actually happen is the I will dissolve. And if you enter a flow state, you kind of know what I'm talking about, where you sort of lose sight of yourself as an entity. You kind of become one with the thing that you're doing. You become sort of like an elemental, an elemental of the task at hand, right? Where you're one with writing, you're one with playing the game. You may even felt the sort of the zone when you're playing a game, where you become some sort of like channeling the divinity of this video game, where the gods of Dota or League of Legends or Valorant are coming and inhabiting your body, and you are playing at a level that is beyond what humans are capable of. And this is what happens in the flow state, is that if we technically look at it, the ego actually dissolves. And what the yogis sort of discovered is that once we focus on something, we enter the second state of mind, which is basically like the flow state, called dhyan. And this is where the object and the subject become one. So how do we sort of keep our ego from entering the picture? Because as long as the ego is active, we will not attain a flow state. So we can look at a couple of thoughts that result in ego or that come from ego. So one is any thought of comparison. This is rooted in the ego because I can't make a comparison without there being an I, right? If I say this person is smarter or stupider than I am, I have to have an intelligence that I'm kind of aware of. So as long as a comparison is being made, all comparisons require a sense of identity. I'm talking about comparisons between you and other people. They require a sense of identity. And as long as you're making a comparison in your mind, you won't enter the flow state. And that makes perfect sense, right? So if I'm like trying to cram for a paper that's due in 48 hours, if I'm thinking, oh my God, I wish I was more disciplined like this other person. Oh man, I should have started like this other person. Why am I like this? Why can't I be disciplined like my older brother or like my older sister who always gets straight A's? They're the golden child. Why am I such a screw up? As long as your mind is making comparative thoughts, you will not enter the flow state. So this is the one thing that you should really, really steer away from. Do not indulge those thoughts at all. So if you're trying to enter a flow state and your mind is making a comparison or making a judgment about who you are, I'm so pathetic, I'm so this, breathe. Breathe in, feel that cold air come in, and let all of those thoughts literally go out with your breath and return to the task at hand. And now we come to the third thing that you need to enter a flow state, which is a focused level of concentration. This is actually the first step that the yogis discovered, which is called dharana. So this is the one thing that you can actually do, which is to focus your attention on a particular task for an extended period of time. So you don't randomly like slip into the flow state, right? So if I'm just like walking down the street, la 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 la, I don't like slip into a flow state of writing my beautiful, amazing fiction novel. What you actually have to do to enter a flow state is to start the task at hand. And then you require a sustained attention for that period of time. And this is where I would actually recommend formal meditation practice to literally level up the skill of focus. So I really like certain practices like pratyahara practices, which y'all can find in Dr. K's guide, but I'll give y'all a simple example of this. I really like fixed point gazing as the most direct meditation technique that will prepare you for a flow state. So fixed point gazing is literally that. Hey, just a quick note. A lot of people will ask us, what do I do next? And that's why we built Dr. K's guide. It's a comprehensive resource that distills over 20 years of my experience, both as a monk and as a psychiatrist. And it's designed in a way that's tailored to fit your needs. So if you're interested in better understanding your mind and taking control of your life, check out the link below. So what we're doing is we're looking at one particular point without blinking for as long as we can. Now, I like this technique for a couple of reasons. The first is that it's hard. And so remember that when we do a meditation technique that is easy, like observe your breath. Oh, like pay attention to the breath. See all of the beauties in the breath. Oh my God, the beauty, the universe, the life, everything's in the breath. You sit there and you're like, okay, I'm breathing. This is boring. I'm going to start thinking about something else. So we need a technique that is challenging to once again engage that RAF so that our mind stays focused. This is why I love fixed point gazing, because what we're going to do is stare at something for 30 seconds, 45 seconds, 60 seconds without blinking. And the harder it becomes, the more you kind of engage it. And then over time, you will kind of get better at it. And so this will all strengthen your capacity for dharana. So what I would sort of recommend is a candle gazing technique. This is called trataka, where you're basically like with a half-lidded gaze, looking at a candle for an extended period of time. You can see, we've got YouTube videos about it. You can check out Dr. K's guide if you want more options and stuff like that. They're both great. But basically, you should practice this technique called trataka. This is the one thing that, unfortunately, you're going to have to practice. I'm sorry that sometimes if you want to learn how to do stuff like consistently enter the flow state, you got to actually practice stuff, okay? What I've done is I've done my level best to reduce the amount of practice that y'all need to do so that you can have a high yield meditation practice that will engage you and force your concentration. Because as you do the practice, your mind will start telling you, hey, we need to blink. We need to blink. we need to blink. And so literally what you're doing is restraining your natural impulses and putting all of your focus into not blinking. Now, I'm not saying that you should go without blinking for like 10 minutes at a time. You want to work your way up, right? So start it with 15 seconds, 20 seconds, 30 seconds. But when it starts to feel to be a little bit too much, go ahead and blink and close your eyes even. And then let that sort of relief kind of wash through you. It's going to feel amazing. Y'all should definitely try it, okay? And so kind of coming back to the flow state, what it turns out is that if you want to enter a flow state consistently, it's not something that you can do, which is precisely why there's such crappy guidance about how to consistently enter the flow state. The good news is that the yogis basically figured out how to enter the flow state on their way to sort of these psychedelic spiritual experiences. And this is where like the reason that the yogis care about the flow state is they didn't care about productivity. Dhyana is the flow state, is one of the steps on the way to something called samadhi, which are these psychedelic experiences in meditation where you feel one with the universe and you see your past lives and you can travel through time and like all this kind of, you can feel the infinity of the universe and you feel connected with all the other human beings. Like there's all the crap that even there are, fMRI studies that show that this stuff does weird things to your brain. And so they sort of figured out that, okay, if we want to have these cool psychedelic experiences, we got to learn how to enter dhyan consistently. And what they sort of discovered is there are three things you need. You need some level of eustress, right? So your reticular activating formation is engaged and you're focused. Can't be overwhelmed, can't be bored. Second thing that you need is you need an absence of ego, because literally the flow state is the dissolution of the self and the merging of you with the task at hand. And the third thing that you need is you need a mind that is strong enough to be able to sustain your focus on a particular task. And the reason that's important is the longer you can stay focused, the greater the probability that you will enter the flow state at any one of those moments. And so the other kind of last analogy that I'll use is if we sort of think about going to sleep. If I can stay in bed for long enough, eventually I will fall asleep. I'm not going to fall asleep walking around. So if I really want to give myself the best chance of entering the state of sleep, what I really need to do is try to stay in bed as long as possible. And that's what dharana does. So hopefully with these three things, y'all can consistently enter the flow state. And once you're able to do that, like, trust me, it's awesome. Like, it really makes you so much more productive. It's how my lazy ass got into Harvard Medical School. I didn't like suddenly become disciplined. What I did is I was able to enter the flow state. I was able to study for 2 hours a day when all my colleagues were like friends were studying 10, 12 hours a day. And since my state of mind was so OP, like everything just kind of sank in and like I did pretty well in med school. So y'all should absolutely do this and hopefully it'll help.